Hey folks, Rob Swanson here. Welcome back to another episode of The Real Freedom Show. And on today's episode, I've got a treat for you. I'm not going to reveal it quite yet. I'm just going to let you know that we've got something coming here on this episode that I think you're really going to enjoy. And I will go there in just a moment. What I want to do first is I want to start getting you engaged in the show. And so what I want you to do is grab a pen and I want you to grab a piece of paper and I want you to write something down. And what I want you to write down is a phone number. I want you to write down the phone number 720-605-6265. 720-605-6265. And I want you to send a text message or I want you to call that number and I want you to ask your questions. I want you to ask your questions as it relates to being an active real estate investor or being a passive real estate investor. I want you to send your questions as it relates to money, as it relates to business, as it relates to life. And I want to get some audience participation and some engagement here on the Real Freedom Show. I want to start taking your questions and I want to answer them right here on the show. I think it's going to be a great segment that you guys are going to get a lot out of. And if you have a question, if you just want to put something out there, just shoot a text in and ask the question. I will do my best to answer it. I'll do my best to bring on an expert that we can interview and that we can talk about and that we can get topical ideas. If there's something that you want us to talk about or just get my take on, send in a text or call and ask your question at 720-605-6265. And we're going to start building that going forward here on the Real Freedom Show. Now, what I want to happen next is I want you to sit back and I want you to enjoy what I'm about to cut us over to. About 10 years ago, I recorded a live training event that I did for a group of real estate investors right here in Denver, Colorado, right at the moment and shortly after the real estate investing world, the markets were collapsing. This was something that I recorded in early 2008, probably late 2007, maybe November, December-ish 2007, possibly January of 2008, somewhere right around that period of time. And this first segment is a 30-minute recording segment of that training where in the midst of economic collapse, when Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers and AIG are collapsing, when the feds are bailing them out, when everybody all over major media publications are talking about how everything is falling apart, I did a real estate investor training and I said, here's what's going on. Here's what I see happening, and here's how you evaluate a real estate deal regardless of the economy's going on around you. Because regardless of what's happening in the world economy, whether we're at an up or a down part of the real estate cycle, once you understand the fundamentals of real estate and what drives those economic booms and busts and some of those swings, and you can get it down to the micro component of how do I analyze this property as an investment? How do I analyze this neighborhood? How do I analyze this city? How do I analyze this county, this state? How do I analyze the economic conditions as a whole? You get put in a much better place. Now, we're going to talk in this segment. You're going to hear some buzzwords like ARV. That is after repaired value. So when I say the word ARV, that's the after repaired value. That's the fixed up, improved value of a property after you as an investor bought it distressed, improved it, and what is it worth fixed up. Now I'm going to give a couple of definitions inside this training about the ARV, and it's the after repaired value. If you're doing a short-term buy it low, fix it up, and sell it for a quick profit, a fix and flip, that definition is what will the house sell for in 30 to 60 days after being improved. That's the ARV. Now, on the other side, the ARV is the value of an income-producing property that you can use to get an appraised value, to actually do a refinance or to do a purchase and either get your capital out or put a down payment in. So the ARV on a short-term flip and the ARV on a buy and hold, the definition is a little different. And you're going to hear that in this discussion. I'm going to talk about both of them. And I'm going to break down how you as a real estate investor can be thinking about economics as it relates to your success and your ability to increase your knowledge and make good investment decisions going forward. So that's the setup. That's what I want you to understand you're about to go into. And listen, driving down the road the other day, I listened to this segment, and this is from 10 years ago. And the reason I want you to listen to this is because it's in the heat of the financial collapse. It's in the heat of the economic collapse. And I want you to hear that regardless of what was going on in the outside world, there are fundamental, simple things that you can do and approach and understand and know about real estate that set you up for success. So that's why I pulled this recording out. I think it's going to add a lot of value to you. So sit back, listen. Let's cut over to that right now. Welcome. How's everyone tonight? Good. Good. Well, thanks for coming out. I know many of you. A lot of new faces here tonight, though. Why don't we do this? Let me just ask you guys a couple of questions. How many of you currently in the room do invest in real estate? How many have been doing it for more than 10 years? More than 5 years? More than a year? How many are just kind of getting going? Okay, a good number. Now, this is going to be a pretty casual event tonight, guys. We've got a good crowd, and there's more coming. For this event, I had over 75 RSVPs, and you can see in our training room here in the office, we've got about 30 to 35 seats. So we had, I took the airline approach, and I overbooked. So if we have to take a break and bring some more chairs from our conference room down the hall or something like that, we will. But, we should be okay. The goal tonight is pretty simple. It's to figure out how to look at a real estate deal and make sure that it's profitable. How many of you guys, hey, welcome guys. How many of you guys are in the business to invest to lose money? How many of you have? Anybody have lost money in a real estate deal? Here's what I'm going to tell you. I've invested both in Colorado and all over the country. And let me tell you the number one mistake, and this is not a slam on real estate agents, okay? How many real estate agents in the room? Not a slam on real estate agents at all. But this is the reality. What I found is that the number one mistake investors make when evaluating a deal is what? They pay too much. The number two mistake is what? They paid too much because they listened to their real estate agent. It's not a slam on real estate agents. What that is the reality that most real estate agents haven't been trained and skilled in evaluating what a good real estate deal is. Now, what I would encourage all of them to do is get trained, because if they figure out the niche of working with investors. See, I've traveled all over the country, and I've trained large real estate brokerages on real estate investment strategies. And I always ask the question, how many agents in the room work with investors?
You know, everybody wants to work with investors, so everybody's hand goes up. How many had a good experience? Everybody's hand goes down. Why is that? Many times it's because analyzing the deal from the broker standpoint is very different than analyzing the deal from the investor's standpoint. We're in the business to make money, and sometimes I tend to frustrate my real estate agents. I do. Because I'll evaluate 25, 40, 50, 100 deals before I buy one. If I don't see the deal that's right, I'll pass. And so the first thing, take out and write down on your pen and paper tonight, pass on deals if you don't see it based on the numbers. This is strictly a numbers game. Is it emotions? No, it's not emotions. It's definitely not emotions from our angle when we're buying. It is emotions when we're designing our projects and creating our strategy to resell or to rent, isn't it? Because who we're going to get into that house is based on emotions. How many of you guys have followed the rehab video diary that we've been doing? About half of you. The other half of you, do you get the emails? Yeah, some of you do. If you look at when we started, when we bought that little, I'll call it a cracker box house affectionately, okay? When we bought the little cracker box house to what it is today, it's a custom house in a very nice working class neighborhood. It's nicer than when the house was brand new. Because the key to exit in this market, either sell or hold as a rental, is to be the nicest house at the most affordable price. Period. So if we go back to the mistakes that people make, they overpay, which eliminates their ability to do what? Underprice. Because all of a sudden profits get squeezed up. So what we're going to do tonight, let me see if I can get this thing to come up, is go through a pretty simple approach to looking at a real estate deal. How many people think it's pretty complicated to evaluate a deal? How many think it's pretty simple? There's one piece that's complicated. What is it? Determining the actual ARV is the complicated piece. We're going to talk at great length about that because I agree with that. Comment is once you figure out the ARV, the rest of it is relatively simple. I would tend to agree with that. In the market today, the whole reason this little workshop came about, and I did the same workshop about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and had the same number of people at the event, a completely different face of people, but everybody that I've talked to gave me the same story. And they basically said, Rob, I'm a little confused about the market today. I see a lot of REO, real estate owned, bank owned downward pressure, right? We see auctions, we see really, really cheap houses being sold, things that 2 years ago in 2005 in the heat of the financial markets were selling for $168,000, $172,000, $178,000. Investors are buying them today for $80,000, $85,000, $90,000, $95,000. Staggering. In 2 years to see that swing. And so what people are telling me and what I'm hearing is I'm confused. I don't know what the right answer is to figure out what is the real value. So you have to figure out what that real value is and then back yourself into the price. What you can pay for the deal. Now to get there, we're going to spend most of our time talking about buying traditionally with traditional financing, with hard money, with some kind of a hard money to cash bridge financing or cash. That's what we're going to spend most of our time tonight talking about, is a cash, what I'll call a cash transaction. Now, cash could be financing, could be all cash, okay? We're not going to spend a whole lot of time evaluating a deal that would be based on terms. If, for instance, a seller is willing to carry back some of the equity or some of the financing, if you're controlling the equity, the cash flow, the profits based on an option or a lease option or something like that. We're not going to get into that because that's a whole different strategy and way to analyze a deal. So we're going to look at a cash type of a deal. Now, to get to where we kind of funnel this thing down, we're going to start big picture first, okay? I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this piece, the real estate market cycle. Let's understand the basics of the real estate market cycle. Because if we look at what we're going to do tonight from a funnel standpoint, we're going to get big, macro, and every step we're going to kind of step down closer and closer towards the front door of the house. If you think about it in that context, if you look at a map, isn't the front door of a house in Atlanta pretty much the same as the front door of a house in San Diego and in Minneapolis and in Tampa and in Denver? It's all pretty much the same. The differences lie in, there's nuances across the country. In certain parts of the country, split level houses are just horrible. Nobody likes them. Other parts of the country, ranches are all the rave, and everybody wants a ranch. So there are little nuances, but at the end of the day, a house is a house is a house. So let's not get lost in the deal of the house. Let's get lost in the numbers, because that's what's going to matter. The real estate market cycle. I'm going to oversimplify it. If you look at the real estate market cycle, you're going to realize that there's two sides. There's what I call the growth side, and there's what I call the decline side. Now, we could get fancy and we could talk about recession and hypersupply, and we could get the real PhD level terms, but I'm not going to. We're going to keep it simple, because simple is what matters. Practical is what matters. We don't have to get PhD level analysis going. We just have to figure out how to make a profit. So on the one side of the market cycle is growth. Here's what happens on that side. We have a constriction of supply, right? So supply goes down. We have rising demand, meaning more people want to buy or rent than houses are available. So there's more demand than there is supply. What does that cause? Causes prices to go up. Does it just cause prices to go up? Do prices just happen to rise? No, they're actually forced to rise. Simple economics 101, with a constriction of supply of anything, when there's greater demand, prices are forced to rise. Now, I got to tell you this one story. The only product that I've found out there that actually doesn't rise with demand are Easter eggs. I can't figure this out. You get a carton of eggs, a dozen eggs, around Easter, and the price goes through the floor, doesn't it? You can buy eggs cheaper at Easter than any other time of year. I can't figure out why the egg suppliers don't raise prices. Can you? The only thing I can come up with is that they're all a bunch of chickens. Oh, come on. You got to laugh. It's my attempt at a joke. All right. I won't hit you with any more jokes. So on the one side, we've got growth. Supply goes down, demand goes up, and prices are forced to climb. When you hit the top of the growth cycle, which is really based on a wage analysis, okay? Once people get to a point where they can no longer afford the house, what happens? The market naturally has to soften and cool. Now, I'm going to go through a quick story on how this all plays out, but bear with me for a minute. We oversaturate a certain price point in a market. All of a sudden, builders are building, and they're going like crazy, and there's land, and there's new houses, and all this stuff is coming on the market, and all of a sudden there's a glut. There's more supply than there is demand. And it's the first time when we hit this little zone between growth and the decline that I call saturation. The market has all of a sudden become saturated with supply. It's the first time that it's happened in the last 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So nobody's willing to open their eyes and recognize what's happening. So they just keep on building. They keep on going and they keep plugging away because it's been phenomenal, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 a week appreciation for the last couple of years. All of a sudden we hit this saturation point, they keep building, and all of a sudden the bottom, if you will, starts to fall out. There's this excess supply and prices have to then start coming back down. So we call this the decline. Now, not necessarily do prices have to fall dramatically, but they're going to flatten significantly. Okay? Appreciation is going to all but go away. We call this the decline side. When you hit the bottom of the decline, what happens? Well, to figure out what happens, let's look at how we get through this whole cycle. You guys realize that the real estate cycle across the country is generally driven by local politics. If you think about the real estate cycle for the last couple hundred years, every market cycles on its own, right? And there's sub-pockets within each market that are different than the macro market as a whole. But every market cycles. What's the average real estate cycle? Peak to peak. What's the average 1 or 2 term of a political career? 8 years. So here's what happens. Down at the bottom of the decline, local politicians get together and say, you know what, our local economy is struggling. We're having a tough time. We've got to get together. We've got to create some governmental interaction, city to city, city to county, county to state. We've got to do something to light a fire under our economy. What do they come up with? I know, how about we provide some incentives to get businesses to relocate into our city? How are we going to provide incentives? Well, I know, let's give a tax break. Let's not charge them taxes for the next 10 years or 20 years. Okay, so we'll give them an incentive to move in. Oh, and let's build all the infrastructure, because if we give them a tax incentive and we build all their infrastructure, they'll move here. When they move here, they'll do what? They'll bring their employees. When employees come, that'll do what? Spur the economy. So that's what starts to happen. And that happens and happens and happens, and all of a sudden, there's an in-migration of demand. The existing supply begins to absorb, and prices eventually start to climb. As prices start to climb, the local politicians get to a point of saying, wow, we did it. We made it happen. This is fantastic. All of a sudden, they realize we have to have more police, more fire, more water treatment plants, wastewater plants. The cost of road maintenance goes up because we have all this new demand and people running around our city. They say, wait a minute, how are we going to pay for that? We gave all the taxes away. So what do? As they get up here, they start to say, okay, let's shift it and put it on the developer. Mr. Developer, if you want to relocate to our hot market, you're going to have to put in the utilities. You're going to have to put in the infrastructure. You're going to have to pay for this, that, and the other thing. And all of a sudden, it happens for a while until prices get to a point where the developers say, what's my risk reward? I'm paying so much, plus I have to put in all these extras. Is it worth it? And eventually, they say, you know what? Instead of relocating here, we can go there, and they'll actually give us the incentive. So politically, we just swing from growth to decline. Does it make sense how that happens in a very basic scenario? So let's talk about where we are nationwide from a macro standpoint. From a macro standpoint, the country has gone through a boom. Easy financing, a lot of speculative activity, a lot driven by good demand, but also a lot driven by speculative demand. The mortgage markets have changed. The demand has changed. Financing products have changed. And guess what? The country as a whole sort of has flattened out. You see it all over the media. Now, is the country as a whole a real estate market? Not really. It's not how we can analyze a deal. If we're going to filter down to analyzing our deal, but we have to recognize that on a big picture, there are certain things that create environments. And then we have to start compartmentalizing those environments into the little pieces that we can handle. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. How do you analyze a real estate deal? One little piece at a time. Just break it apart, and it's pretty simple. Once we go from choosing the macro market, and I don't care if you're in Denver, I don't care if you're in Tampa, I don't care if you're in San Diego, once you pick your market, you're going to want to figure out and choose your target neighborhoods. You're going to want to start to drill down and say, where do I want to invest inside your market? Let's talk about Denver for just a quick minute. What's happening in Denver right now? For the last 5-6 years, appreciation in Denver has been what? Flat as a pancake. Okay? At the same time that Denver, I'm seeing a 2%. Yeah, about 2%. At the same time that Denver has been a pretty flat market, across the country, what's happened? 10, 12, 20, 30, 50% appreciation. Now, that 2% that we've seen, I really believe is an artificial appreciation. I don't really think we had 2% appreciation. I think that because of the easy financing that we had available, we are artificially propped up and held up because of cheap, easy money. If we hadn't had the cheap, easy money, I think Denver would have seen an actual decline in values. That we didn't because of some outside influences. So where are we today? We have huge inventories, don't we? Now, there's huge inventories all over the country. So again, whether we're analyzing any market, we can apply these same basic principles. We have big inventories. We have relatively low demand. But the demand that we do have is qualified demand, isn't it? The demand we do have is qualified demand. If somebody wants to buy or rent a house, they have a very specific, if they can get qualified, they're going to be picky and they're going to be ready to buy. We also have a lot of transplanted homeowners into the tenant and rental pool. The tenant market, not only in Colorado, but across the country, is pretty strong. Really strong in Colorado. So one of the first things that I do to choose target neighborhoods, and I'm going to use the whiteboard a little bit, is I look at market activity. If this is the city, okay, let's break the city into a few little pockets. Does not have to be a huge metro city. Applies to the outskirts of Denver. It applies to St. Cloud, Minnesota, 100,000 people. You're going to look at different pockets, and you're going to look at the market activity in those pockets. How I break these pockets apart first is based on price. The first thing I do is I just break it apart by price. So if this is my metro area, I can say my first price area is right here. And let's call that say that's $100,000 to $150,000 homes. Down here is $150,000 to $200,000 homes. Over here is $100,000 to $150,000, and up here is $500,000. Now let's not go that high. Let's say greater than 200. Okay? If we break it apart by zone and we look at price point, now in a metro area, this little market of 100 to 150 can now get broken into little pockets. So all we're going to do, guys, is we're going to take it from a big picture and we're going to start to chunk it apart. And we're going to say, okay, this little pocket is $100,000 to $115,000 homes, generally speaking. Not a big range. Most neighborhoods. So let's say we're going to go from metro area to kind of the quadrant or the region within that metro area down to a neighborhood level. And we're going to take it all the way down to what I'll call a neighborhood value, actually tagging a neighborhood value to a house. But if we start with this big picture, we get down to, in most neighborhoods, isn't the price swing pretty small between one type of house to another? In most neighborhoods. You get the anomalies that you have to watch out for. I'll tell you my thought. I never like to be the pioneer in a neighborhood, necessarily. I don't like to be the most expensive house on the block. I also don't like to go necessarily into the war zone. Okay? I'll tell you this, Denver doesn't really have a war zone. I've been in war zones all over the country, and I can tell you some stories about war zones. And I won't bore you, but I wouldn't invest there. I personally wouldn't buy there. Until the local government comes in and says, we need to clean this up. And once there's a cleanup effect, then I would look seriously at it. But I'm not going to be the guy to try to sweep the war zone. So if we break this thing down by pocket, we step in and we say, okay, what's my exit strategy? Because I've got to be able, if I'm going to analyze a deal, before you ever buy in real estate, you've got to know how you're going to get out. Doesn't mean that what your plan is going to work. Okay? It doesn't mean it's going to work, but it means you better have a plan. So before you're ever qualified to buy, you've got to know how you're going to get out. Now, you better have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. Because here's what you can control. In our business, we work a lot with private investors. You guys know that I'm a big proponent of paying cash for deals. And so when I sit down with our private investors, I'm very clear that first thing we're going to do is we're going to pre-plan our exit strategy. And we're going to know what we're going to do with this house. Why? Because we understand the demand inside this little pocket neighborhood that we're talking about. We know if there's resale activity in the last 90 days. We know what the rental market is doing. So we know the demand. Then we're going to break it out and we're going to say, okay, based on this demand, here's the exit strategy that we're going to use to capture the demand. We're either going to resell it, we're going to rent it, we're going to sell it on a lease option, we're going to do something to get out. So before you ever qualify to get in, you got to know how you're going to get out. Then this is what I tell all of our investors. I can control certain things. What I buy, where I buy, how much I pay, how I manage the project, what we spend, the quality we put in, the things that I can control. What I can't control is that I have a perfect buyer at the perfect time that likes my perfect house with the perfect financing ready to go when I want them to. I can't control that. Now I can hedge my bet. I can be the nicest house at the cheapest price if I buy right going in. So I can hedge my bet that if we have a smaller pool of demand, smaller pool of buyers that are going to be discriminate, they're going to be picky, they're going to want the nicest. If I deliver that product, aren't they going to choose me over the other guy? They are. So I look at the little sub-pockets and I say, okay, in this $100,000 to $115,000 neighborhood, rents are what? You know what? We can get, you know what? You want me to go grab a chair for you real quick? Need 2 chairs? Yeah, okay. She can grab a chair for us. Let's see, where was I? Rents in this area are, let's say, in 115 to 100, let's say they're about $750 a month, okay? We get into the 150 to 200, let's say rents are around $1,100 a month. Relatively fair? So I'm going to look at rents. And then when I come over here to this 200,000 plus area, and I break this apart, and all of a sudden I've got the $300,000 market, the $400,000 market. Do rents in those price points go up proportionately with the price of the real estate? They don't. So you could buy in the $400,000 neighborhood at a great price. And you could, $400,000 price, you could buy it for $275,000. You can put your $40,000 into it. And what if the perfect buyer at the perfect time isn't waiting? And you have to drop to a plan B. Is the rent that you're going to receive going to cover your debt service? So I look critically when I'm evaluating picking my deal positioning. I look critically at what my plan B exit strategy is going to offer. So if I get into a rent ratio discrepancy, I may opt out of that price point. I may opt out of that area. I tend to like to stay in areas where if I have a retail option and I have a hold option, I'm going to cover my debt service with my rents.